Good afternoon or good morning and maybe good evening, depending on where you're tuning in from. I know we often have people joining these live streams from not just here in the States or even in Canada, but also just around the globe. So wherever you're tuning in from, welcome. I'm super grateful that you're here. I'm super grateful for your time because I know it's a lot of time and energy and effort to carve off 30 minutes to an hour to talk about new ways to grow giving. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about ways that we can work together to boost retention rates. A little bit of background before we dive into talking about retention. Here at Next After, we really are all about one thing, which is how do we grow, how do we help nonprofits grow their digital fundraising? And we do this in really three primary ways. We're a research lab where we are working to try to understand what's happening out in the nonprofit space. How are nonprofits today trying to actually increase performance? What's going on in the donation pages, in the new donor experience, et cetera? And secondly, we're a digital first agency where we go help nonprofits every single day actually install tactics and strategies and campaigns that can lift performance and lift results. And then we turn all those learnings from our agency work, from research, and from A/B testing into training like this. So I'm really grateful that you're here, that you've given us some time today to talk about how can we grow giving and ultimately move the needle on donor retention. I see lots of people jumping right in the chat, which is amazing. I would love if you jump in the chat either on LinkedIn or Facebook, YouTube, wherever you're at, and let us know where you are tuning in from today. It's always fun to see what organizations are jumping in, trying to figure out how do we decode giving and generosity together, where in the world people are tuning in from. So some shout outs. Let's see. We've got Karen from Barry University in Miami, Florida. Welcome. We've got Ava from Compassion International. Welcome. We've got Margaret from Utah. Margaret, Utah. I think is that right? We've got Jesse. I know Jesse from DC. We've got Jessica from Colorado, Duncan from Vancouver, people all over the place. So thank you for jumping in today and joining us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we've got a lot that we're going to walk through. And I want to show you a lot of kind of interesting things that we've been discovering on this journey that we've been on over the past probably 18 months, trying to uncover what can actually move the needle on one of our most critical metrics, which is donor retention. And I probably don't have to tell you that donor retention is one of the most critical metrics that we can spend our time and energy trying to impact. Because if we can increase retention, it lifts all of our other metrics. The more that donors stick around, it certainly makes lifetime values of these donors go up and to the right, but it also makes things like our acquisition dollars and our acquisition campaigns and efforts look a lot better. It's easier to spend more money to acquire a donor if we know that they're going to stick around for the long term. And I'm sure you've heard the adage that it's cheaper to retain an existing customer than it is to acquire a new one. But somehow in our little nonprofit universe, it feels like that sometimes isn't true. We spend so much money on acquisition and we see so many people walk out the door. Lots of different reports would suggest that kind of industry averages on retention are anywhere from 40 to 45%. And they're much lower when you just look at new donors. It's more like high teens, maybe low 20s. So there's clearly a problem. We've been stuck there for the past, as far back as really those kind of benchmarks have been put out, stuck in that 40 to 45% retention window. So how do we actually move the needle? We've been focusing our research efforts on trying to uncover some practical strategies that can actually change this performance. And we found some really interesting things. And ultimately, there's one strategy that's pretty simple. It's not going to blow your mind, but it might be interesting to see how much this can actually impact retention if we really set our minds to do it right. So all that said, let's dive in. Check this out. This rocket's going to take off. This is what we're trying to do with our retention rates is take them to the moon. So let's dive in. We've been on this journey again for the past about 18 months, trying to conduct some research to see what would give us the best chance at actually moving retention. And we've conducted probably 18 to 20 different studies like these that we call mystery donor research, where we go out, we put ourselves in the shoes of a donor and experience giving from their perspective. So we might start on the homepage and try to find our way to the donation page, make a donation, experiencing all the friction and oftentimes lots of pain in the process of giving. We'll look at the onboarding experience and we look at all sorts of different things to try to map out what does it feel like to be a donor. And what are the things that we can actually test to try to improve or tweak or uncover different interesting tactics that we can put to the test and actually decode, does this work to get more people to give? But oftentimes when we conduct this mystery donor research, the thing that it's lacking is a visual into the actual performance of these organizations. Unless all these 200 plus organizations are going to share all of their performance data with us, it's hard to go see how many of these tactics actually lead to or directionally are leading to upticks in performance. And so what we did in this case is we're trying to uncover what can move the needle on retention is work with our friends at Virtuous, who are a CRM. And so they obviously have access to lots of data. And what they helped us do is sort of synchronize this donor experience with how nonprofits are actually performing. So we've been analyzing the full giving experience of 211 organizations with full visibility into their overall donor retention performance, their online retention performance, and their offline retention performance. And so by marrying these two things up, we can start to identify some patterns and trends of what kinds of tactics might actually be leading to some of these high retention rates, or what types of things might actually be leading to low retention rates. It's not definitive proof, but it's going to give us some correlations and trends that we can go put to the test in a meaningful way. To date, we've released 2 iterations of this study. It's really on a 4, possibly 5-part series that we're working through. Part 1, we looked specifically at what does the messaging look like? What does the messaging look like when someone goes to give? How are nonprofits communicating why someone should give to them rather than to some other organization or at all? We call it the value proposition. We look at that through the lens of retention. And then we jumped in and we looked at the full donation experience, everything from showing up on the website to actually making the donation on the donation form. And again, we looked at that with overlaying retention rates and things like that. And ultimately, there's a lot of different things that we uncovered in these studies. But sort of the macro level takeaway is this, that the working recipe for high donor retention is really 2 critical ingredients. Number 1, we need to have what we would call values-focused fundraising. It's easy to raise funds in the moment when there's a big current event going on, or maybe there's a piece of legislation that's happening, or there's a disaster, or there's all sorts of things that are happening here and now that people can be motivated by to give right here and now. But that doesn't always set people up to give for the long term. So when we talk about values-focused fundraising, it really comes back to how do we communicate with donors and make a donation ask in a way that helps us align with our ideal donors on shared values, shared viewpoints and vision for how we see the world and how we want to see it change, so that the donor trusts you when they give their money, that you can make an impact with their gift on something they meaningfully care about and want to see impacted, with a vision for long-term impact, not just short-term results. We have to have that, but paired with a strong recurring giving program. It's easy to assume that recurring giving on its own is sort of the magical strategy to lift retention, but we actually found lots of different examples where there's organizations who have a lot of recurring donors, but don't have super high retention. And so we have to actually have this combination of values-focused fundraising and recurring donations. So those are really the macro takeaways from those first couple of research studies in this world of donor retention. And as we're going along this journey, trying to figure out what are all these different interesting things we can try and test around retention, my good friend Brad showed up, and Brad oversees data and analytics here at Next After. And so he has a really unique sort of perspective and input and vision, because he gets to see all the different data from all the different organizations that we work with day in and day out. Specifically, we have about 30 organizations where we can kind of see, I would say, everything from email performance to web analytics to historical donor records and CRM data. And we can stitch all of that data together to look at the picture holistically. And Brad, about a year or so ago, started putting together what he calls Friday Fun with Numbers. I've made a logo for him. I'm not sure if it'll stick around, but we'll see. This is what AI came up with yesterday for our Friday Fun with Numbers logo. But in his Friday Fun with Numbers, basically, people on our team would submit in questions, interesting things that maybe an organization asking, or something that kind of came up in a conversation. Wouldn't it be interesting if we could find this or that, or we knew the answer to this? And Brad would take these questions along with his own and dive deep into the data to see, can we find some answers? One example of this is where we're going to zero in today, is this question. What is one indicator of a donor's likelihood to churn this year? So Brad dove into this question, looking at the data across all these organizations, and found a really interesting trend. It's a trend that you couldn't really spot necessarily just looking at one organization. But when you can look at things at the macro level across a wider data set, you can see the trend pop out. And essentially, what he found in this kind of deep dive into the data is that the biggest indicator of someone's likelihood to churn next year is whether or not they've given you multiple gifts in the previous year. If they just gave you once last year, there might be a high probability they're going to churn. If they give you twice, it's going to look a heck of a lot better that they're going to give to you again in the next year. And what really stood out to me is this. When we look specifically at new donors who give one gift in their first year of being a donor have a retention rate of about 21%. But if you can get that donor to give a second gift in their first year, their retention rate jumps up to 45%, which we love to look at percent increase, percent decrease. That's a 114% increase in donor retention if you can get them to give to you twice in their first year. Now, oftentimes, as we look at sort of the life cycle of a donor, many times we're thinking if we get them in the door and then we'll cultivate them for a while and then maybe we'll try to reactivate them at year end. But there's actually strong evidence to say that many of these new donors are going to be willing to give to you even within the first, say, 90 days of becoming a new donor. Some might even be willing to give to you again within the next couple of weeks. And so we shouldn't just wait until we have the next big high urgency campaign. We need to cultivate these people well. In fact, as we look at a few different examples of organizations, this social services organization, you can see this is the percentage of second gifts and when they come in by month. So those donors that gave a second gift, when do they actually come in over the next 12 months? The social services organization, they see 44% of second gifts are coming in within the first 90 days of someone being a new donor. And this is a trend that we see across a lot of different organizations. This missions organization, they find that 36% of people's second donation come in within their first 90 days of being a new donor. This higher ed organization, numbers a little bit lower, but the trend is the same. 28% of second gifts come in within the first 90 days of someone being a new donor. And so what we can start to conclude from seeing this really high giving activity, second gift activity in the first 90 days, paired with this jump in retention when we get someone to give that second gift, how do we start to influence that and give ourselves the best chance of winning that second gift? Well, very simply, we need a highly effective new donor welcome series. And that's easy to say, and it's an easy kind of concept to think about and conceptualize. And this probably isn't a big innovative takeaway for you. Maybe you have a new donor welcome series. You've heard them talked about and all the different things that you can do inside of them. You're probably saying this. In fact, many of you are likely saying this, that I already have a welcome series. So are we good to go? Is our retention as high as it's going to get if we already have a welcome series? I want to challenge the assumption that you have a welcome series in the first place with some data, because what we found in this latest iteration of this research around donor retention and the donor experience is some pretty shocking findings about just how poorly we as an industry are doing with onboarding new donors. So here's some highlights and some interesting stats. Number one, did you know that 27% of organizations, I'll say that number differently, more than one in four organizations did not send a receipt within the first week of someone giving? Keep in mind, these are online donations, and we live in a world where there's an expectation that if you do anything online, you're going to get immediate and instant feedback, instant communication, instant response. And if I give you my money and then you don't even send me a confirmation that I gave you money, I don't know that I've really even made the gift. I'm not sure if it's actually gone through. I got to check my credit card statements. And then even then I'm puzzled and I'm skeptical, and it certainly does not build my trust with you. 1 in 4 organizations do not send a receipt within the first week. And maybe you send it in week 2. Maybe it comes a month later. That's way too far down the road. And if you don't have that immediate confirmation, I may forget that I even gave in the first place. So that's kind of problem number 1. Problem number 2 here, 51%, which is more than half, more than 1 in 2 organizations, did not send a thank you within the first 7 days of donating. We need the receipt as that initial confirmation. but then we also have to say thank you. Sometimes people combine those into one single communication. I'd probably split them out. So you have a confirmation, then you have a dedicated thank you message. But 51% of organizations did not say thank you within the first week. And again, if you're not sending this stuff out right away within the first 24 hours at least, you've missed the opportunity to create a great first impression with these donors. If it comes out in week 2 or week 3 or a month later or 2 months later, it feels like an afterthought. It feels like you forgot about me. I just gave you my hard-earned money to try to invest in a meaningful cause that I care about, and you don't even have the time to say thank you to me. And it feels like I'm second class. I don't, my gift doesn't really matter to you if it takes weeks to actually hear anything from you in a meaningful way. So we have to say thank you right away. 33% of organizations, 1 in 3, did not send any cultivation within the first, not just 7 days, but now the full 90-day window. 1 in 3 organizations did not send any cultivation. And how we'd classify a cultivation is effectively anything that's being sent out that's not a receipt and is not a donation appeal. So 1 in 3 organizations didn't send anything that was remotely close to trying to invest in the relationship and steward that donor within the first 90-day window. On top of that, again, we see 51%, again, over half, more than 1 in 2 organizations made no attempt whatsoever to try to win a second gift in that same 90-day time frame. No appeals sent out, no emails that are actually giving you the opportunity to make an additional gift, make an additional appeal, upgrade your gift, become a monthly donor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 1 in 2 send nothing like that, make no attempt. So the data is pretty clear that even if you think you have a new donor welcome series, the odds are you're missing some very critical and basic pieces of communication to welcome and onboard your donors and lead them towards a second gift. And there is a whole lot more that we could dive into how do you actually go craft an effective and meaningful new donor welcome series. So let's suppose you do have one, you have something resembling a new donor welcome series. You've sort of beat the trend that we've just seen, and you actually send a receipt and you send a thank you. Maybe you've got a cultivation email and you've got an email to actually ask someone to upgrade or give again, all going out within the first 90 days. Let's suppose you have those basics, which again, the data would say it's not really going out, even if you think you have it. What would actually make it effective? What would make it highly effective? Because that's going to be the key. We can send some emails, but how do we know that they're working? How do we know that they're actually moving the needle? We're not going to unpack every single possible strategy that can improve your new donor welcome series. We have a whole course that actually dives deep into that topic. Everything from what emails to send, how many to send, when to send them, who to send them from, what topics to talk about, what to ask them to do at what times, even what are the data points that you're going to need to actually go set these up. We have a whole course that unpacks it. But here's a few things that you should consider and think about. What we found is that the most effective welcome series, I did, by the way, I had to Google what is the plural of series. Is there an extra ES, or is there 2 S's? Is there an apostrophe? This is correct for those of you who are questioning my grammar. The most effective welcome series are sent from actual human beings. A very quick experiment. You can see the control and the treatment. The control is sent from the name of an organization. It uses very kind of brand language, marketing language. Version B is a much more personal approach. It's a holistic experiment, but it's changing the sender name to not come from the brand, but to come from Audrey, a human being. The subject line doesn't sound like marketing, it sounds like conversation. It says quick question. The rest of the copy of the email is focused on the same call to action and same value proposition, but it's written in a more warm, conversational, and genuine way. And this approach, even just here at the very initial stage of are people going to open this thing, led to a 330% increase in opens, which means 330% more people that are considering actually engaging with the content of your email, whether it's going to be a donation appeal, or it's a newsletter, or it's an ebook download, or some other piece of cultivation. The most effective welcome series are being sent from actual people that you can hit reply to and have a real conversation with. We've also seen this, not just with newsletters, but also with donation appeals, that the most effective welcome series are using a humanized design approach. You can see version A and version B here on your screen. Version A is kind of this longer form newsletter. You see you've got lots of different buttons in there to click through on the different links. You've got images representing all the different resources. Version B uses an email style that looks a lot more like an email that you and I could just go ahead and send each other out of Gmail right now. It has a little introductory note. It's got 3 bullet points that are all just hypertext links that go to the different resources. And it says, sincerely from Jacob. It has a little logo in the corner. You could keep that, you could drop that, you can test that for sure. But what they found was this simplified, humanized design approach led to a 77% increase in clicks. And if you've seen any of the training from us, you've probably seen many experiments where this leads to increases in donations when you send out donation appeals, when you write more humanized text. You remove all the kind of like the big HTML wrappers almost every single time. This personalized approach leads to a greater increase in performance. The most effective welcome series, they leverage content offers for cultivation, not just stories of impact, not just newsletters, not just passive information. In this experiment, version A and version B, welcome series that have 2 different amounts of emails. You can see that version A here has 7, version B has 9. They take slightly different approaches. Version A sends a survey. It then sends an about email about the organization. It sends these 3 different emails that have stories of impact with sort of a soft donation ask, maybe a PS style donation ask. Then it makes a direct appeal, and then it hands you off to the newsletter. That's version A. Version B starts similarly with a survey and then about email, but then they run through this series of 6 emails where basically they're just sending ebook after ebook after ebook. These ebooks are valuable content that help these new subscribers and new donors engage deeper in content and valuable content that's adding value and meaning to their own life, while also learning more about the organization and the cause that they are investing in or considering investing in. And after that series of ebooks, well, then there's a handoff to the newsletter as well. There are no direct donation appeals in version B. However, they saw that this led to a 920% increase in donations without sending any direct appeals, because on the back end of those kind of ebook offer emails, you read the email, you click through, you go to a landing page, you read more about the ebook, and you fill out a quick form to say, yes, send that to me. And on the confirmation page is a donation appeal with an opportunity to give after you've received something valuable first. So it's a way of leading people down a pathway towards donations without actually sending more appeals in the inbox, but leading with cultivation. And that we found many, many times over can be the more effective approach to actually leading people to give, and sometimes give that second gift. We've also found that the most effective welcome series ask people to do one thing at a time. They're not sending these long form emails that have 5, 6, 7 different types of things that you can do and follow us on social media and also maybe give and also maybe come to this event and also read this cool thing and we wrote this thing. You should check it out. Here's our annual report. We don't want to pack that all in an email. Here's what we found through testing. This email has 6 unique calls to action, all going to different places. This email has 1 call to action, granted with 2 links, but it's focused on one thing, one primary next step. The copy of the emails is a little bit different because version A is trying to explain 6 things at once. Version B is explaining one thing in the email and leading you towards a single decision. Version B, the single call to action led to a 96% increase in people actually choosing to do anything at all. Oftentimes we can overwhelm people when we put so many different things packed into our emails, so much that they choose to just opt out entirely. But if we ask them to do one thing, we have a better chance of actually getting them to engage with the primary call to action of the email. Last example for you, the most effective welcome series: communicate like an authentic human being, holistically, not just in a one-off email, but holistically. Version A and version B, 2 different email welcome series. Version A uses a more kind of traditional approach. You can see it's got branded templates and images and call to action buttons and the whole like HTML style wrapper, the logos at the top and the big banner. Looks like a traditional marketing email. The things that MailChimp or HubSpot would kind of pre-fill for you when you go load an email template. Version B looks a lot more authentic. In fact, holistically across the whole welcome series, they used a plain text style email. They still had all the tracking on the links so you can track performance and all that sort of stuff, but the design looked more human and authentic. The language and the messaging and the copy is more relational and conversational. All the emails are focused in their nature on trying to align on shared beliefs about the impact that we want to make because we value similar things. The emails are trying to provide value, not just passive information in the form of a newsletter or an about us email, but trying to provide meaning and value in every communication. They're asking people to do one thing at a time per email. They're all sent from actual human beings, not the name of the brand. Some of these emails actually ask you to hit the reply button and engage in a real conversation, which sounds really scary because if you do that, then you actually have to reply back yourself. We'll talk about that in a moment when we see the results. But they encourage these reply backs, and then ultimately they made a specific donation ask at the very end of the series. And what they found with this holistically authentic, humanized approach was a 33% increase in opens. That's solid. A 42% increase in clicks, so better engagement. Okay, cool. An 875% increase in donations. That's not a small lift. That's a big lift. Altogether, a 99% increase in overall revenue from this series. At the end of the day, they did get a lot of reply backs that they then had to have conversations with in the email inbox. But what they found was they had enough revenue coming in that they could go hire a part-timer to help go manage those inboxes and manage all the replies. And ultimately, they were able to do more of the meaningful work of their organization because people would reply back with things going on in their life or in their family. And this organization is able to equip them with resources, whether it's a book or it's a counseling service, even to help equip them in their families and in the relationships to have better mental health, better livelihoods, etc. So they're able to do more missional work while raising more money at the same time by just communicating like a human being and not like a marketer. So go figure. Now, the question I would be asking if I were you is okay, I can see all this stuff is interesting in increasing clicks and opens and even donations within a given experiment or even within a given whole welcome series. But does this stuff actually move the needle on retention? Is it just more revenue now, which is not bad? That's a good thing. More revenue now is good. But does it actually move the needle for the long term? That's a really hard question to answer because there are so many variables that come into play when you start to look at retention. How do I know it was this one welcome series and not something else random that happened that caused an increase in retention when you're measuring performance for such a long time? Well, as we've dove into this research study, looking at the new donor onboarding series and communication, we're overlaying retention performance over the top. It's really hard when you look at data in that way to see patterns emerge, but we've seen a very clear pattern emerge in this most recent research study. I'm going to share 4 of the key findings with you. It's not all the key findings. You have to get the full report to dive even deeper, but 4 of the key findings that I think are really fascinating and really helpful for us as we think about can an effective new donor welcome series, as we've talked about, move the needle on retention. Here's what we found. Here's a key finding. Organizations that have high retention rates send more of their emails from an actual human being. Surprised? Here's what the data says. You can see it's not this huge jump, but what we did was we broke these organizations down into 3 buckets. You've got high performing retention organizations, that's the green bar. You've got sort of middle of the road performance, that's the blue bar. And then you've got low performing organizations, that's the orange bar. And you can see the percentage of these organizations that are sending emails from actual human beings. You're more likely to send from a human being if you have high retention and vice versa. Now you might say, well, that's a one-off thing, but there's a pattern that's emerged. Secondly, high retention organizations are the most likely to eliminate distracting calls to action in their email. What we found in this research is that these high performing organizations in terms of donor retention, they include the fewest emails that have all these kind of lots of different calls to action. They're more inclined to actually send emails that ask you to do one thing at a time, which we looked at in that experiment can lead to greater clicks and engagement and ultimately conversions as well. High retention organizations are less prone to send just passive cultivation like newsletters and stories of impact. Instead, they often opt to send things like content offers, which we would classify as like a survey, a petition, a course, a video series, an ebook, something that I can actually engage with and get meaningful value from, not just passive information that's being blasted at me in the form of a newsletter. Here's what the data would say is these high retention organizations are actually the least likely to send just this passive information. They're sending more active content and cultivation content. And then the last finding for you is that low retention organizations are the least likely to ask their donors to hit the reply button and have a real conversation. When we look at the data, what we found is these high and mid-performing organizations have the greater likelihood or are more likely to send emails that engage in a human way and ask you to reply back and have a conversation. So the pattern that's emerging from all of these different sort of research sources is that the more we lean into communicating like actual human beings with our donors, treating them like genuine people and not just a piggy bank, the more we invest in the onboarding series to create a good first impression with the person on the other end, the better performance we're going to see, certainly now, but also into the future, as we can lead more people to have more trust in our organizations, the impact that we can have, ultimately leading to that second gift, which leads to them giving in the next year, which gives them a greater likelihood of becoming a key multi-year, which lifts all key metrics and can drastically grow the impact of our organizations. All with one simple strategy, which really at the end of the day is we need to communicate with our donors like they're actual human beings on the other end. Now, quick little checklist for you, things to consider. Number one, do you have a new donor welcome series? And don't just quickly say, oh yeah, we do, we're good. Consider the data we looked at how many organizations are missing on some of the most basic and critical pieces of communication. Do you really have a new donor welcome series? Maybe you think you do, but maybe it's not running for some reason. Maybe somewhere along the line, a setting got tweaked where it's not firing or deploying anymore, and you got to go check your technology. So go investigate this one. Make sure that you have a functioning new donor welcome series. Secondly, if you pass the first test, are you using these proven tactics to improve performance? Sending one email at a time with one call to action at a time, sending from actual people, not just the brand, talking like a person, not like a marketer, leaning into cultivation and meaningful cultivation. Are you using these types of proven tactics? And then third, holistically, are you treating your donors like genuine human beings? There's so much more that we could unpack. I do have a slide for you where you can actually scan a QR code and get access to all these different iterations of this research series that we're on. The next part of this research series, as we're looking at donor retention, that we're going to dive into and have already started some analysis on, is looking at, okay, we've analyzed value proposition, we've looked at the donation form experience, we've looked at onboarding. Well, then how do these organizations try to activate these donors in a high urgency campaign, like during year end? So that's where we're at next, and what will be coming soon to you in a matter of months is what does this look like when you get to year-end season? Are there any sort of commonalities and trends that we can find? You can scan this QR code and you can go get all three of these different reports on the landing page, download them, they're totally free. You'll get a PDF. You can go dive deep into all three of these. The other thing I want to draw your attention to, and then we'll have some time for some questions, is what we call the NEO Summit, the Nonprofit Innovation and Optimization Summit. This is our conference that we put on every year, every September. And we are committed with this conference to bringing some innovation into our nonprofit sector, where oftentimes we can find ourselves kind of behind the innovation curve. So what we do is many of the speakers that come into the NEO Summit are innovative thinkers in the for-profit space. And we believe that a lot of these speakers we invite have really meaningful ideas that are innovative, that can impact giving in a significant way. And so we want to bring them into our space, challenge our assumptions as a sector, give us new things to think about to level up and innovate, and ultimately grow generosity in a more significant way. I see David is going. Thank you, David. Love it. I'm excited to see you in person. You can go ahead and scan the QR code here to learn more about the summit. Make sure you get your ticket. The price will go up, I think, in a matter of weeks. So make sure you jump in and save as much money as you can by getting your ticket today and now. It is, you can see the theme, Generosity Jones and the Holy Grail of fundraising. We always lean into just having a lot of fun at these events. There's really good speakers and content, but you are going to have an absolute blast. This is like my favorite few days of the year that I look forward to every year because it's a ton of fun. You meet lots of like-minded people that care about how do we use data and innovation and research and analytics and all these kind of data things to go fuel real meaningful growth and innovation in our space. So if that sounds like you, if that's interesting to you, you'll find good company here at the NEO Summit. All right, I'll put this slide back up, and I think we've got some time for some questions. So let's see. Let's kind of go back through our chat here. We'll see what we've got. Question from Peter, who's asking, how are we calculating retention rate? Now, Peter, I'd have to go back to all my tables and stuff from when we were working this out with Virtuous to get the exact metrics. But effectively, we're looking at existing donors over trailing 12 months, I believe, is the metric that we use to look at trailing 12 months, and then the previous trailing 12 to see did they give, and then did they give again. And again, we're splitting those out to look not just at overall, but we're also looking at online retention rates uniquely, and we're looking at offline retention rates. Ultimately, we took all those and we split all these organizations into 3 buckets, into the high performers, mid performers, low performers. It wasn't an overly scientific process. We basically said, let's take the top third, middle third, and bottom third and see what we find. And as you've seen, we're starting to find some very interesting trends, even by just looking at it in that kind of simplistic way. About a month ago, we did another one of these live streams where we released our digital first fundraising benchmark, where we dove deep into things like retention with digital first organizations. And we dive kind of deeper into some of those key metrics on a more significant level. So if you want to dive deeper into that, you can check that out at benchmarks.nextafter.com. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, Jessica, let's see. Does the reason for the second gift affect retention? Thinking that there's an emergency that brings in a second gift versus a general fundraising ask to support the organization, and if the reason would affect the retention rate at all. Now, I can't go point to a specific chart or graph or table that definitively answers that question, but my head's where your head is at. Is if second gift comes in from something like there's a disaster that just happened, or there's an earthquake, and I want to give again because this big thing has happened, and I want to make an impact and help when I can. Yeah, that probably does affect retention, but it's also, I think, worth pointing out that if they gave to you once and now they're giving to you again, there has to be some sort of built up trust there. I couldn't definitively say one way or the other. Is it going to improve things? Is it going to harm things? But at the end of the day, whether they're giving to you because there's a big current event type of thing that has happened, or because they came back because they believe in the mission, we need to be driving all of our communications with that sort of value-centric fundraising, so that even when these kind of current events happen, that there's shared alignment in kind of beliefs and values of the impact that we want to see collectively in the world on the causes that we care about, so that we build up that trust in preparation for the next opportunity to give. Great question. Caitlin has a question, and she says, do you find these strategies, let me jump to the right one here. She says, do you find these strategies to be just as effective for other types of welcome series? For example, across the board, is plain text more effective than designed emails? We have tested these types of strategies across the board in lots of different contexts. And what we see very consistently, whether it's a new donor welcome series, it's a donation appeal, it's a newsletter, it's an email welcome series, just when someone subscribes to you, we find a lot of these same trends hold up regardless of context. Because at the end of the day, people give to people, and they want to engage with human beings, not with clever marketing or marketing machines, but with people and faces that they know and trust, and with organizations that they know and trust and can put a face with. So we see that across the board be an effective approach. There's nuance to that, because sometimes you'll test a fully plain text design in something like a newsletter and not see it perform quite as well in terms of clicks as a slightly more designed template. And so you can always tweak and you can always test. But the kind of overarching principle is that whether you have a little bit of design elements or it's a fully plain text style email, we need to communicate in an authentic way. Okay, question from Michael. Do these tactics vary based on the age of a donor? I see many charities struggle to engage with the quote unquote next generation of donors. That's a great question. And a lot of these tests are not necessarily isolated to a specific donor segment in terms of age demographics. Oftentimes when we're testing, we're more running segments around motivations, or we're running segments around new donor versus second-year donor or lapsed donor, trying to get people to reactivate, all that type of stuff. We oftentimes there's not enough volume at each of those age demographics to really effectively test. But these tests are running across demographics and leading to these kind of overarching results. It certainly would be interesting to test some of these things in those more nuanced demographics if you have the volume to do so. The things that we certainly see across the board, and there's lots of other benchmark data around this stuff, is the shift in certainly channels and how people, as you kind of move down the age demographic rung to the quote unquote next generation of donors. Obviously, there's this increasing trend where people give and give more and more online, and you've got sort of the boomer generation that would give in a variety of ways. They'll give at events, they'll give through the mail, and many of them give online also. But as you start to work your way down, like Gen X typically will give online and sometimes through the mail. You get to millennials like me, and I'm never going to write a check and send it to you in the mail. I've probably written 15, maybe 20 checks in my life, only when I absolutely have to, and there's no other option. So as you move down that rung, it's increasingly digital as sort of that first primary touch point of communication. But as we think about other channels, I'm going to use myself as an example. I love getting stuff in the mail. I've got a little walk down the road to go get to our kind of community mailbox down here. I'll check my mail. If I get a little personal note and a personal letter, that is a huge thing. But I'm never going to go write you a check and stick it in the mail to send it back. But I might appreciate that touch point to actually build trust with the person on the other end. So we need to think about, how do we utilize these channels maybe in new ways to engage that next generation of donors, because they're going to interact with them differently. But it doesn't mean that things like direct mail totally go by the wayside and get thrown out. We just need to think, how do we use that in an effective way to create a meaningful touch point? Okay, question from Marilyn. Michael, thank you for the question. Question from Marilyn. If you're using Blackbaud, okay, here we go. Using Blackbaud and your email comes from your personal email account, does that count as engaging as a human via a mass email campaign? I can't speak specifically to the nuances of Blackbaud setup. That's certainly not my area of expertise. However, when we're sending these communications out, whether it's through a Blackbaud product or it's through HubSpot or it's through MailChimp or it's through one of the million other email platforms that exist out there, oftentimes what we're doing is, the email that it's coming from is, we'll say, like my email is nathan@nextafter.com. I'll let you in on some insider information since you're joining this live stream. I have a slightly different email address that I use when it comes from a quote unquote like marketing email, because we use an alias to go kind of manage all the replies back that come in. So it comes from an email that has my name in it and looks genuine, and it is genuine. And there's a person on the other end who's going to make sure that you get a reply. And oftentimes you will hear from the real me if you hit reply on those. So there's some nuance in how you set this stuff up. It's not just like go plug in your Gmail address and go start sending from it. There's a lot of concerns about doing that. But set up an email address that has a human being's name in it, probably your name in it, not a no reply address or not a marketing@ourorganization.org address. Put a real name in it. Make sure the sender name is from an actual human being. But still, behind the scenes, you've got all your tracking to make sure that you're getting the best performance out of your emails. You've got all your processes to make sure that customer service replies come in and go out in a timely fashion. So we're not sacrificing that piece of it. We're just making sure that the communication comes from a human being, and there's a human being on the other end who can reply when your donors reply. Hopefully that's helpful. Question from Sean. I'm almost complete setting all of this up for my launch. That's awesome, because this is one of the hardest initiatives to get over the line, even though the idea of a new donor welcome series is fairly simple. It's really hard to get it done because so many people want to speak into it, and there's a lot of technical things that go into it. Anyway, congrats on getting that far. Once done, do you have a service that can go over what I have done to confirm I do have everything in place? Great question. If you want to consider partnering with us, working with us in any way, you can go to nextafter.com. There's a big yellow button in the corner that says "Let us help." Any kind of engagement with us starts with a big discovery process. We don't normally jump into kind of one-off project and review sort of stuff, but we start with a big discovery process to try to understand what's been happening in your program, what's working, what's not, and then go craft sort of a 3-year roadmap complete with projections of where should we be going if we want to actually see the fundraising program grow using a digital-first approach. Now, that said, we also have a whole course on new donor welcome series that is a great tool for you to use in this case of, hey, I've got something I'm working on. I want to see, does it line up with proven strategies? If you go to courses.nextafter.com, or you go to actually nextafter.com/membership. Maybe we can put that in the chat. If you go to nextafter.com/membership, you can start a 30-day free trial of all of our courses, including our new Donor Welcome Series course. So you can run through that. It'll take you about an hour or 15 minutes of total like video watch time, but you'll see a lot of different experiment examples, kind of go-to tactics that we've tested and proven over time to be a more effective starting place for your welcome series. So go check that out. Check out that course, compare your current welcome series to that. You might find some new ideas and things that you can test as you get that initiative off the ground. All right, question from Megan. Do you have any data on how to use a welcome series for non-donors or people who sign up for your newsletter in order to convert them to donors? We don't have a whole course on this one yet. That's certainly something that will be coming down the road in the future. We do have some templates around it on our website, nextafter.com. But at the end of the day, the things that I would kind of recommend to you are very similar to what you'd put in a new donor welcome series as well. You should definitely have a confirmation email to make sure that whether they've signed up because they came in through an ebook offer or they just filled out sort of an opt-in form to sign up for your newsletter, send something right away to confirm that they're on the list. As we're doing all this different kind of research, what we often find is even things that are as seemingly simple as signing up for a newsletter, oftentimes you won't hear anything for weeks until that next newsletter comes out. And maybe it takes a month for the next one to come out. And so I don't know, am I on the list or not? And I may have forgotten I even signed up after 3 or 4 weeks passed. So definitely send something right away to confirm that they are on the list. I would lean into cultivation as much as you can. Obviously, sending the newsletter, but having a unique series that adds some other valuable pieces of content, like these sort of ebook content offers. Those, as we talked about, are an effective way to lead to that second gift, but it's also a great way to lead to that first gift. If I can engage in something valuable like an ebook, there's a donation page offer on the back end of signing up for that ebook. When someone receives that sort of free gift that's of significant value, oftentimes there's a moment where they're willing to give and give back to you almost as a thank you, but also oftentimes as a way of reaching other people with this valuable content. So I would lean in heavily in that email welcome series into this kind of active content offers as a way to cultivate people with a pathway to giving on the back end to lead them to that first gift. Question from Sean, or another question from Sean. Do you offer a service that can review my website and automation before launch? Similar question that we had before. Again, I would go check out that nextafter.com/membership is probably the best way that you can go see some real results and kind of compare to what you've put together. But you're also welcome to have a conversation if you want to dive deeper and talk about a deeper kind of engagement with us to go take a look at your full digital fundraising program and chart a path towards growth. Again, go to nextafter.com, hit the yellow button in the top right corner that says "Let us help." Question from an anonymous LinkedIn user. It says, is it best to have a set template used for emails and newsletters? I will say yes, but hear me out. When I think of template, I'm just thinking of you should have some sort of like clear rubric, more or less, to guidelines to follow to make your life easy in terms of a process. So you're not recreating the wheel every single time. But template doesn't mean template doesn't have to mean design. Just because you have a template doesn't mean you have to have a big hero image at the top and logos and buttons and all that stuff. So for these kind of recurring newsletters, you can certainly test into what is the optimal design. If you currently have a kind of heavy HTML, lots of graphics and images, I would run a test on the next 1 or maybe 2 newsletters that you send out to see, can we lift performance with a more simplified template approach? And if the answer is yes, after you run those tests, then go tweak your template so that it's a much more simplified approach. It may just be you've got a block for an introductory note, you've got a block for adding a few bullet points with call to action links, and then you've got a block that's just kind of where you wrap up with some, hey, thanks so much, hope these are helpful for you, shoot me a reply if you have any questions. And that might be the extent of your template. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but I certainly would have templates in place to make it sort of a repeatable process to make your life easy. So again, you're not recreating the wheel every single time. The last question that we have before we wrap up here, what is the timeline for a welcome series? Is it daily? Is it weekly? And that's a great question. There's not one rule to follow forever for every organization. There's lots of variants that can go into that. Typically, when we talk about a new donor welcome series, how we structure it is about 8 emails, starting with a dedicated thank you email, ending or having, I guess, within it, survey emails. You've got reply back emails that are asking people to reply. You have sort of an upgrade email asking people to become a monthly recurring donor. You've got cultivation mixed in. Again, you can see that whole template and dive deeper if you go check out our new donor welcome series course. But effectively, it's about 8 emails sent over the course of roughly 30 days. So if you do the math on that, you're sending an email every 4 to 5 days typically. So it's a pretty frequent cadence of communication that's dripped out constantly to the inbox. After the 30-day window, then you can kind of hand them off to your kind of ongoing newsletter or other cultivation that you might be sending out. That probably won't be as frequent, but I would certainly make sure you're putting a significant amount of communication within that first 30-day window, probably about 8 emails, to establish a relationship, build trust, connect them with a human being at your organization, deliver value to them, and then ultimately by the end, lead them to an opportunity to actually upgrade their gift, either through a second gift or through becoming a monthly donor. Awesome. Thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sticking around as long as many of you have. I'm really grateful again for your time. It is hard to carve off 51 minutes to devote purely to learning new tactics and strategies. So I'm really grateful for you and for making that time. If we can do anything to serve you, please let me know. Shoot me an email at nathan@nextafter.com or go to our website. You can find out how we can serve you by hitting that Let Us Help button, or explore any of the other resources that we have available to you. At the end of the day, we're trying to decode what works to grow giving and generosity. We've got a vision to unleash the most generous generation in the history of the world. We cannot do that without you. So thank you to you for sticking around, and happy optimizing to you as you go start to implement some of these tactics into your programs.